3 weeks ago, Jared Kushner stood in Tel Aviv shaking hands over a ceasefire deal. The headlines praised diplomacy. World leaders celebrated peace, but a small group of Bible scholars noticed something nobody else saw. They opened an ancient book most Christians ignore, Zechariah, written 2,500 years ago, and inside they found a checklist. Signs that mark when a nation enters God's final judgment. Economic collapse, internal division, failed leadership, spiritual emptiness. They compared that list to America today. Every single box checked, every warning sign flashing red. And the timing? It started the moment we moved our embassy to Jerusalem. When people talk about end times, they rush to Revelation, dragons and beasts, the mark of the beast, the Antichrist. Everyone quotes Daniel's visions. Everyone debates the rapture. But Zechariah sits ignored in the back of most Bibles, stuck between minor prophets nobody reads. That's a mistake, because Zechariah doesn't just prophesy about Israel. He prophesies about the nations around Israel, the powers that rise to help her, and the judgment that falls when those helpers get too involved.
Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more awe-inspiring stories of faith, survival, and miracles.
The prophet wrote around 520 BC. Jerusalem lay in ruins. The temple needed rebuilding. The Jews had just returned from Babylonian exile. And God gave Zechariah visions that stretched far beyond construction plans. He saw the future, our future. In Zechariah 12, verse 3, God makes a chilling declaration. On that day, I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. Everyone who lifts it will be cut to pieces. Not just Israel's enemies, not just ancient kingdoms, all people. Every nation that involves itself with Jerusalem faces the same fate. But here's what makes this different from other prophecies. Zechariah doesn't just predict what happens to nations. He lists the internal signs that judgment has already begun, a checklist that appears inside a country before it falls. For 2,500 years, scholars studied these signs in relation to ancient empires. Rome showed them before the collapse. Babylon displayed the pattern. The British Empire exhibited every marker. Then, something shifted. Bible teachers started noticing the same pattern emerging in a modern America. Not speculation, actual measurable parallels. And the timing couldn't be more significant. Because America's relationship with Israel just entered uncharted territory. Traditional scholars say no. The scriptures name Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. They identify nations by ancient boundaries. America didn't exist when the prophets wrote their visions. But a growing number of theologians argue we're asking the wrong question. The Bible doesn't name America, but it describes a powerful nation in the last days that matches no other country in history. A nation with specific characteristics that only one modern power fulfills. In Ezekiel 38, verse 13, the prophet describes merchants of Tarshish and the young lions. Tarshish represented the western edge of the known world. The young lions meant nations that emerged from Tarshish's expansion. Britain colonized that territory, and Britain's greatest young lion was the United States. Coincidence? Maybe, but there's more. Isaiah 18 describes a land shadowing with wings beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, a nation that sends ambassadors by sea, a people scattered and diverse, a nation measured and powerful. Some scholars see ancient Kush, others see something prophetic, a description of a faraway superpower across the oceans, a nation defined by wings, the very symbol on America's Great Seal. But here's what's undeniable regardless of interpretation. No nation in history shaped Israel's modern destiny like the United States. America voted for Israel's statehood in 1948. American weapons protected her in every war. American money rebuilt her economy. American political power shielded her at the UN for 70 years.
Then President Trump took this further than any leader before him. December 6, 2017.
He recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. 6 months later, the U.S. Embassy moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Every other president promised it. Trump actually did it. Evangelical leaders called it prophetic. Some invoked Cyrus comparisons, a secular king used by God to fulfill divine purposes for Israel. But they missed something crucial in Zechariah's prophecy. The nations that help Israel aren't promised blessings alone. They're warned about the burden, the weight, the potential judgment that comes from touching God's chosen people. Trump's decision thrilled millions of Christians. It strengthened the alliance, but it also locked America into a prophetic position, because Zechariah doesn't distinguish between enemies of Israel and helpers of Israel. It warns that all nations who burden themselves with Jerusalem will be cut in pieces. And then Jared Kushner stepped onto the stage, a Jewish son-in-law to the president, a political novice handed Middle East peace, a man whose very name means praise in Hebrew. Kushner became the architect of something unprecedented. After Trump's embassy move, the world erupted. The UN General Assembly voted 128-9 against recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Only 9 nations stood with America. President Trump threatened to cut funding to countries that opposed us. The threats didn't work. Nations risked American aid just to vote against American policy on Jerusalem. Why? Because touching Jerusalem brings something beyond politics. It brings confusion, irrational obsession, exactly what Zechariah predicted when he called it a cup of trembling. But Kushner didn't stop with the embassy. He spent 3 years building relationships with Gulf Arab states. He offered economic deals, technology partnerships, regional security arrangements. In exchange, he asked for one thing: recognize Israel's right to exist. The UAE signed first in 2020, then Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan followed. 4 Arab nations normalized relations with Israel in 4 months, something diplomats said was impossible. The Abraham Accords changed Middle East politics overnight. Revolutionary, historic, but read the fine print. The agreements didn't just normalize relations, they created a framework for American brokered peace, a structure where Washington serves as guarantor, as mediator, as the power holding everything together. We didn't just recognize Jerusalem, we built our entire foreign policy around it. Then, in 2024, reports emerged that Jared Kushner was quietly mediating between Israel and Hamas, working through Egyptian and Qatari intermediaries. By January 2025, those efforts produced results: a ceasefire, hostages released, reconstruction funds pledged. The man who united Arab states with Israel now unites Israel with Hamas, and America's fingerprints cover everything. Because Kushner doesn't work alone, he represents American interests, American power, American diplomatic weight. Every deal he brokers binds America deeper into the Middle East web. Every agreement makes America more responsible for outcomes. Every handshake adds weight to the burdensome stone. For 70 years, the United States served as Israel's primary defender. We vetoed dozens of UN resolutions. We blocked sanctions. We stood alone when necessary. That position came with a cost nobody calculated. Because Zechariah's warning isn't about helping Israel. It's about what happens to nations who make Jerusalem their political centerpiece. Nations who can't function without involving themselves in Israel's conflicts. Nations who build their diplomatic identity around the burdensome stone. And while the world applauds peace deals, nobody's asking the harder question: what happens when the stone gets too heavy to carry?
Zechariah uses 2 images. First, Jerusalem becomes a cup of trembling, something that makes nations drunk, confused, unable to think clearly. Second, it becomes a burdensome stone, so heavy that everyone who tries to lift it gets torn apart. Look at international politics regarding Jerusalem. The United Nations has passed over 500 resolutions about this one city, more than any other issue in UN history. More than resolutions about genocide in Rwanda, more than wars in Syria, more than North Korea's nuclear program. Jerusalem makes nations irrational, obsessed, drunk with controversy. Even America's closest allies condemned the embassy move. Traditional friends turned against us. The vote wasn't close. 128 countries opposed American policy. Only 9 supported it. This isn't normal political disagreement. For 70 years, America served as Israel's shield at the Security Council. We protected them consistently. Then, in December 2016, something changed. The Obama administration abstained from a vote condemning Israeli settlements. America didn't veto, we let it pass. First time in decades, America refused to protect Israel on settlements. The Trump administration reversed that immediately. Full support returned. Kushner's peace plan even acknowledged Israeli sovereignty over settlement areas. But the damage revealed something. America's position as Israel's defender isn't guaranteed. It's fragile, based on political will that shifts with elections. And as our internal problems multiply, maintaining that position gets harder. The Abraham Accords promised peace, but they created obligations. If Hamas attacks Israel, we're involved. If Hezbollah fires rockets, we respond. If Iran threatens, we mobilize. Every ally we helped Israel make becomes another commitment, another potential war, another burden. We didn't just pick up the stone, we built our foreign policy around it. We made it our diplomatic identity, our political cause, our international priority. And now the weight is showing. Because while America projects power abroad, something's rotting at home. The internal condition tells a different story, one that matches Zechariah's checklist with disturbing precision. Zechariah doesn't only prophesy about external geopolitics, he describes internal collapse, the rot that happens inside a nation before its fall. The divided garments, economic betrayal. In Zechariah 11, the prophet acts out a strange scene. He asks for his wages. They pay him 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. God calls it the good price I was valued at, same amount Judas received for betraying Jesus. The passage speaks to economic corruption, to people who value everything in terms of money, who sell out their values, their God, their future for silver. America's national debt just crossed $36 trillion. That's over $100,000 for every citizen. We're adding $1 trillion in new debt every 100 days. Politicians from both parties promise fiscal responsibility. Then they vote for massive spending bills, tax cuts without spending cuts, programs without funding sources. We've sold our children's future for today's comfort. The wealth gap reached historic proportions. 3 Americans now hold more wealth than the bottom 50% of the country combined. CEO pay increased 1,460% since 1978. Worker pay increased 18%. We've divided the garments. We've priced everything in silver. We've become the generation that sold out. But the economic betrayal is just the first marker. The hardened hearts, spiritual apathy. In Zechariah 7 records God's indictment. They refused to listen and pulled their shoulders and stopped their ears. They made their hearts like stone so they wouldn't hear. Hearts like stone, ears deliberately closed, shoulders turned away from God's voice. In 1972, 90% of Americans believed in God. Today, it's 74% and falling. Church membership dropped below 50% for the first time in recorded history. But numbers only tell part of the story.
Research found that only 6% of American adults hold a biblical worldview. 6%. Even among self-identified Christians, only 19% believe the Bible is literally true. We have more Bible translations than ever before, more Christian books, more worship music, more podcasts and conferences and streaming services, and less actual belief. We've developed hearts of stone. We consume Christian content like entertainment. We attend services like social clubs. We talk about God without actually obeying Him. Zechariah saw this coming, the external religion without internal transformation, the form of godliness that denies its power. But it gets worse, because when a nation loses its economic integrity and spiritual foundation, leadership collapses next. The worthless shepherds, failed leadership. Zechariah 11, verse 17, pronounces judgment on leaders. Woe to the worthless shepherd who abandons the flock. The sword will strike his arm and his right eye. His arm will wither, and his eye will go blind. The worthless shepherd looks the part, but provides nothing, holds the position, but abandons the responsibility. Look at America's leadership across every sector. Political leaders promise solutions and deliver gridlock. They claim to serve the people and enrich themselves. Congressional approval ratings hover around 20%, yet 95% of incumbents win re-election. Religious leaders fare no better. Scandal after scandal rocks megachurches, pastors exposed for financial fraud, moral failures, abuse cover-ups. The shepherds fleece the sheep. Business leaders maximize profits while pension funds collapse. They take bonuses while laying off workers. They offshore jobs while demanding patriotism from employees. Education leaders graduate students who can't read at grade level. Medical leaders manage sickness instead of creating health. Media leaders choose clicks over truth. We have shepherds everywhere, almost all of them worthless. Zechariah predicted this exact condition. Leaders in position, but not in purpose. Shepherds who abandoned the flock. And God's response? Judgment falls not just on the leaders, but on the nation that tolerates them. The neighbor against neighbor. Division. Zechariah 14, verse 13 describes the final internal sign. A great panic from the Lord will fall on them. They will seize each other's hands and attack one another. Chaos, confusion, neighbor against neighbor, internal conflict so severe the nation tears itself apart. America hasn't been this divided since 1861. We can't agree on basic facts. We live in separate information worlds. We view the other political party not as opponents, but as enemies. Families split over politics. Churches divide over social issues. Communities fragment along ideological lines. A 2022 poll found that 43% of Americans believe civil war is likely in the next decade. Nearly half the country thinks we're headed toward internal violence. We've stopped debating ideas. We attack character. We cancel and destroy anyone who disagrees. Social media amplifies every conflict. Cable news profits from division. Politicians win elections by demonizing the other side. We're not just divided, we're at each other's throats.
Every one of these internal markers appears in Zechariah's prophecy. Economic betrayal, spiritual apathy, worthless shepherds, internal division, and every one now characterizes America. But here's what nobody wants to face. Zechariah didn't list these signs as warnings to avoid judgment. He listed them as proof judgment had already begun. Zechariah's prophecy reveals a pattern. Judgment doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in stages, each more severe, each giving opportunity to turn back, until the final stage, when turning back is no longer possible. Stage 1. The warning. Zechariah chapter 1 records God's plea. Return to me, and I will return to you. Don't be like your ancestors who ignored the prophets. Turn from your evil ways. This is the warning stage. Prophetic voices rise. Natural disasters increase. Economic shakings occur. But they're warnings, not final judgments. America experienced this for decades. September 11, 2001 shocked the nation. We returned to church briefly, then went back to business as usual. The 2008 financial crisis revealed economic fragility. We bailed out banks and kept spending. COVID-19 shut down the world. We fought over masks instead of examining hearts. Hurricane after hurricane, wildfires, floods. Each time we rebuild and forget. God sends warnings. We ignore them. Stage 2. The refining. Zechariah 13 describes the next phase. In all the land, 2 parts will be cut off and die, but the third will be left. I will bring the third through the fire and refine them as silver is refined. 2/3 cut off, 1/3 refined through fire.
This isn't a warning anymore. It's active judgment, but with purpose, refinement, purification, removing everything false to reveal genuine faith. America may be entering this stage now. The internal chaos, the economic pressure, the cultural collapse, the division, it's cutting away everything built on sand, everything that claimed God's name without God's character. Churches that preached prosperity are closing. Ministries built on personality are collapsing. Christians who held faith casually are walking away. What remains will be refined, tested, purified through fire. It's painful, but it's not final judgment. It's preparation for what survives. Throughout history, this pattern repeats. Rome exhibited these signs before the fall: economic corruption, moral decay, internal division, military overextension. The empire didn't collapse overnight. It degraded over decades. Babylon showed the pattern: wealth and power followed by arrogance, spiritual emptiness, then sudden conquest. The British Empire displayed every marker. At its peak, it controlled a quarter of the world. Then internal problems mounted: economic strain, loss of moral authority, colonial resistance. Within 50 years, the empire dissolved. Each civilization thought it was permanent. Each believed its power was unshakable. Each ignored the warnings until refining became unavoidable. America is no different. We've entered the fire. The question is, what emerges on the other side? Stage 3, the siege. Zechariah chapter 14 reveals the final stage. The day of the Lord comes. I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city will be captured, houses plundered, half the population taken captive. This is the end, the day of the Lord, when God personally intervenes in human history, when all nations gather for the final battle. This stage is coming, but it's not here yet. The question is whether America will exist to see it.
Some scholars believe America must fall before Stage 3. The silence about a Western superpower and end times prophecy means we're already gone. Others argue America becomes so weakened we're irrelevant, present but powerless. Either way, the trajectory is clear. If we're in Stage 2 now, Stage 3 approaches, and nothing in Zechariah suggests a nation in Stage 2 returns to prosperity and power. The pattern moves forward, not backward. But maybe we're wrong about all this. Can we be wrong? Absolutely. Prophecy interpretation has a terrible track record. Confident predictions proven false, date setters embarrassed, movements built on prophetic certainty that collapsed when Jesus didn't return on schedule. The Millerites in 1844, the Y2K panic, Harold Camping's repeated failed predictions. Every generation thinks they're the last. Every era sees signs. Every crisis looks like the beginning of the end. So why take these Zechariah parallels seriously? First, we must approach prophecy with humility. We see through a glass darkly, as Paul says. Our understanding is partial. Our interpretations are fallible. Claiming absolute certainty about prophetic fulfillment is pride. God reveals his timeline to no one. Jesus himself said only the Father knows the day and hour. What we can do is recognize patterns, watch for convergences, stay alert without becoming dogmatic. Second, Zechariah's warnings aren't coded mysteries, they're observable conditions. Economic corruption, spiritual apathy, failed leadership, internal division. We don't need special revelation to see these in America. We need honest assessment. The question isn't whether America is mentioned in Zechariah. The question is whether America exhibits the conditions Zechariah associates with judgment. And the answer is measurably yes. Third, we must avoid making America the center of biblical prophecy. We're not Israel. We're not the covenant people. We don't occupy the geographic or theological position Israel holds. America can fall completely and every prophecy still unfolds exactly as written. Our significance is circumstantial, not essential. We've played a role in Israel's modern history. That role matters, but it's not the main story. The danger is viewing world events through an American lens rather than a biblical lens, asking what about America instead of what about God's plan. So, how do we engage Zechariah responsibly? We watch, we warn, we prepare spiritually, but we don't claim knowledge we don't have. We don't set dates. We don't build theology on speculation. We compare observable reality against biblical patterns. We note connections without demanding certainty. We stay alert without becoming alarmist. Because whether America is in Zechariah's judgment stage or not, the application remains the same. Turn before it's too late. Even if we're wrong about the timeline, we're right about the condition. And the condition demands response. But there's hope for individuals even if the nation falls. Here's what gets lost in judgment discussions. God always preserves a remnant. Zechariah 13 verse 9 promises this. I will bring the third part through the fire and refine them as silver is refined. They will call on my name and I will answer them. I will say they are my people and they will say the Lord is my God.
1/3 survives, refined, purified, tested, but not destroyed. This isn't about national salvation. America as a political entity may not survive, but Americans who truly belong to God will. Personal versus national judgment. Lot escaped Sodom. Noah survived the flood. Rahab lived when Jericho fell. The pattern repeats throughout Scripture. God judges nations, but he rescues individuals who call on his name. Your future doesn't depend on America's future. It depends on your relationship with God. If judgment comes, economic collapse, internal chaos, external threat, those who know God will have what they need, not because of stockpiles or bunkers, because God provides for his own. 2 Chronicles 7 verse 14 offers a promise. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and heal their land. This promise remains active, not because America deserves it, because God is merciful. Corporate repentance could change everything. A genuine turning, not political theater or emotional manipulation. Real brokenness, actual change. It's happened before. Nineveh repented and God relented. Hezekiah prayed and Jerusalem was spared. Josiah reformed Judah and delayed judgment. Could it happen in America? Only if God's people actually become God's people. Only if those who claim his name start living like it. But even if national repentance doesn't come, individual faithfulness matters. Your prayers matter. Your witness matters. Your integrity matters. Be the remnant. Live ready. Stay faithful. Trust God regardless of national outcomes. Because Zechariah's ultimate message isn't despair. It's hope for those who endure. The refining fire isn't meant to destroy you. It's meant to purify you. And what emerges on the other side will be genuine, tested, proven. The question is whether you'll go through the fire trusting God or cursing him, whether you'll see judgment as the end or as the beginning of something new. Because after Zechariah's darkest chapters comes chapter 14, and in that chapter something changes. The Lord himself shows up. Zechariah 14 verse 4 says this, "His feet will stand on that day on the Mount of Olives which faces Jerusalem." Jesus returns physically, visibly, to the exact spot he left from. That's how the story ends. Not with nations destroying each other, not with chaos winning, but with the king returning. Everything we're watching now, Trump's policies, Kushner's deals, Israel's conflicts, America's collapse, it's stage setting. The props are being arranged, the actors are taking positions, and most people have no idea they're in a play. America's role may be ending, The curtain might be closing on our act. The internal signs suggest we're in the refining stage. The external entanglements suggest we've picked up the burdensome stone. What happens in the next 5 years will determine whether we see stage 3 or collapse before it. Watch the Abraham Accords. If they expand to Saudi Arabia, if Kushner brokers that deal, the prophetic clock moves again. Watch America's internal division. If we fracture further, if chaos increases, if neighbor truly turns against neighbor, we're deeper into Zechariah's warning than anyone wants to admit. Watch Jerusalem. Always watch Jerusalem, because everything orbits that city. American politics, Middle East alliances, global economics, everything. The burdensome stone, the cup of trembling, the place where God's feet will stand. America thought it was helping Israel. We might have been sealing our own